Hey everybody, so I don't want to waste too much of your guys' time, so I'm going to try and make this really quick. I have two things that I want to say. The first being that I have made a full comeback to my other channel. I'm going to be posting over there a lot. Of course, I'll still be posting on here just as much as I always have. But I'm going to be making some different type of content over on the second channel. And it would mean the absolute world to me if you guys could go down either into the description or the pinned comment and go subscribe to it really quick. Like I said, I'm going to be making some more content over there that I'm really passionate about, and I'd love to still have your guys' support. So it's totally up to you if you want to do that. Like I said, it would mean a ton to me. The other thing that I wanted to say really quick is that I do have an email where you can send in your own stories. It is rylhstories@gmail.com. I have it linked in all of my descriptions. You can find it in the channel bio as well. I don't get sent nearly as many stories as you guys might think, so your chances of being in a video if you send one in is very high. But I think that's pretty much it. Again, go subscribe to the second channel if that's something that you're interested in. A huge thank you to all of tonight's authors. This is a really good lineup, like one of the best we've had in a long time. Be sure to like the video if you enjoy it. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Everybody has a pet they can talk about forever. The one that changed your life. For me, it was Azrael. But let me start at the beginning. I was 20 years old and I moved into my own apartment. I was in a quiet part of an up-and-coming town, Tahita Gardens. It was the kind of clean, little town that had everything you needed when you got off the highway. The first few weeks were pretty great, but something was missing every night I came home to a dark apartment. It unsettled me. I never really liked being alone, and to be honest, I still ran up the stairs because I was afraid of the dark. My mom had gotten me 5 nightlights as a joke for my move-in gift. The joke was on her though. They were littered throughout the apartment to light up every dark corner. My best friend was over to check out the new apartment one night, and I was confiding to her how lonely it was to come home to an empty apartment. "Get a pet," my friend suggested, while inspecting her newly painted toenails. "The pet deposit though," I argued. I had enough saved for an emergency after first month's rent and a security deposit, but not enough to extravagantly spend a chunk on a pet deposit. She shrugged and wiggled her toes, impatiently waiting for them to dry. "But you wouldn't be so alone," she sing-songed. Her suggestion planted a seed in my mind, and before long, I caught myself surfing online at the local animal shelters. I clicked the X in the corner every time I found myself looking at adorable kittens and puppies, but there I was, browsing a few days later. My curiosity finally got the best of me. My apartment really was lonely. I could only convince my best friend to spend the night so many times in a week to combat the eeriness of living alone. I headed to the shelter on my day off. I hadn't even talked to the landlord about getting an animal yet. A young woman welcomed me warmly, asking what animals I would like to see. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I gestured to the whole facility with my hands awkwardly. "Right this way," she smiled, taking me left towards a cacophony of barking. I knew right away a dog wasn't for me, despite the whole man's best friend title. They were very loud and I just felt like my small apartment wouldn't be big enough. I asked to see the cats next. We were greeted with frantic meows as we walked into the room walled with cages. Each cage had a laminated card with a name on it with a description of their personalities. Maisie, Luna, Misha, Mittens, and Purris. I grinned at that one. But one high-pitched meow stood apart from all the rest. In the left corner, a lithe tabby pressed against the bars. She meowed more as I came closer. Her name was Lyra, but no description, just her age, 10 months. I put my fingers through the bars. She purred as she nuzzled my fingers. "Can I meet Lyra?" I asked tentatively. The woman nodded, stepping forward to let Lyra out. I got a better look at her. She was such a pretty tabby. I couldn't tell if she was gray or brown, but she had little black tiger stripes. A thick band of black fur went all the way down to her tail lip. She tipped her head up, meowing loudly and purring. She had these bright green eyes rimmed with white eyeliner fur and a white chin. She settled on my lap, the meowing never ceasing. I took her home that day. Got all her paperwork and paid. I guess I had a cat now. I winced when the pet deposit hit my account, but she was worth it. Her name didn't really suit her all that well though. I ended up calling her Azriel after an old rerun of the Smurfs came on one night. From then on, it was Azriel and I. She came out of her shell after a few months. She was the clingiest, most vocal cat I had ever met. She was exactly what I needed to fill my lonely apartment and the void in my life. She greeted me by the door every time I came home like she just waited for my return. She curled up on my pillow or on the crook of my shoulder every night. I soon discovered she liked to fetch, but only fluffy scrunchies. She started carrying my everyday scrunchie around in her mouth until I got her a pack of rainbow ones. There was one on the floor in every room of the apartment. She developed a habit of chirping when she was woken up, when she had a scrunchie in her mouth, or to announce she was padding into her room. She had such a sweet little chirp, just a soft little burr noise. Azriel made sure I was never alone. She was the kind of cat that turned a person into a cat person. She protected me, and I protected her. She had a few odd habits, sure, nothing out of the ordinary for a cat. Sometimes at night I'd wake up to her sitting on the edge of the bed, growling at the closet. In the early hours of the morning, I'd hear her hissing at God knows what. She'd stare at dark corners and the fur on her spine would lift. It was just peculiar things that she did that I chalked up to her being a cat. When Azriel was about 5, she started developing some even odder behaviors. She started peeing in places other than the litter box. She couldn't keep her food down, and she hardly moved around as much as she used to. She would wake up in the middle of the night yowling. This wasn't like my little trooper. Something had to be wrong, so I took her to the vet. That day, my entire world shattered. Azriel was dying. Felt like a punch to my gut. She was in the end stages of kidney failure, the vet said, and it came so suddenly that there was nothing I could do. Within 2 weeks, she was so weak that I couldn't bear to see her suffer anymore. I sat in the stuffy vet room, sobbing as I held her in her final moments. I was supposed to have her for so much longer. The same empty feeling returned in my chest, but this time the hole was bottomless and the edges sharp. No longer was I greeted by chirps when I got home. The apartment felt as empty as ever. Ominous, almost. That first night I couldn't sleep. How could I? Azriel wasn't curled up next to me, my trusty sleep partner. I was laying there crying myself to sleep when I heard the closet door creak ever so slightly. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes. My best friend was snoring softly. She was spending the nights out of support. The closet door had been closed, but in the angled moonlight that shone through the blinds, I could see that it was about 6 inches open. I got out of bed and closed it again. Just a draft, probably. Days turned into weeks. I had dark circles under my eyes. I hardly had an appetite. My best friend gently suggested maybe we should look at kittens, but the very thought brought tears to my eyes. How could I replace her when I hadn't even accepted that she was gone? Odd things had started happening in the apartment since that first night. Items were going missing, or ending up in spots I didn't remember. The closet door kept opening in the middle of the night, and lights flickered. It was like the hollowness in my heart manifested into the apartment. I ignored it for the most part, but things gradually started getting worse. It had been 4 months since Azriel had passed away. I still wasn't sleeping very much. Just short, fitful periods where I managed to close my eyes. My eyes shot open as I heard shuffling from somewhere in the direction of the closet. The closet door sat ajar. I held my breath, listening. Something was in the room with us. I nudged my best friend with my foot ever so slightly. Her breathing faltered for a second, but returned to a sleeping rhythm. The slight sound caught the attention of whatever stood at the foot of the bed. I heard it shift its position. I could feel hot breath on my face. Something wet dripped onto my cheek as I laid frozen, rigid with fear. It was inches from my face, trying to see if I was awake. I laid like that for hours until I heard the chirping of birds outside our window. Whatever it was had shuffled back to the closet, and the sun's first rays appeared, and I had let out a shaky sigh of relief. Sometime later my best friend woke up and I tried to tell her what happened, but she brushed it off as sleep paralysis, saying my sleep pattern was so messed up that I was hallucinating. She said she'd pick up some melatonin in hopes that maybe it would help me get some real sleep tonight. With the sun and light on my side, I checked the closet out, but it was just a shallow place to store our clothes, no more than 2 feet deep. I couldn't house anything as it was full of shoe boxes and duffel bags for when we went on vacation. That made me feel somewhat better. Maybe my friend was right. She brought home some melatonin just like she promised. I swallowed a pill with a sip of water, Right as we settled into bed together for another slumber party, my eyelids felt heavy before my head even hit the pillow. My head smacked against something hard. Shit, that hurt. Bright colors danced around the darkness my eyes hadn't adjusted to. I think I was on the floor. How did I get? Something yanked my ankles, and I instinctively reached out to grab something, but my fingernails only caught in the wooden floor. I started screaming and tried to glance down at my feet, but I only caught a glimpse of long, black skeletal fingers wrapped around one of my ankles. It was attached to a sinewy, too long arm that looked like it was attached to the black mouth that was the closet doorway. Light flooded the room as my best friend clicked on the bedside lamp to find me being half dragged into the closet, shrieking bloody murder. The tight grip on my ankle disappeared. She watched as the hand quickly slithered back into the dark. I was still screaming. My friend tried to calm me down, clearly shaken herself. She tried to provide a logical explanation for it, but I wasn't having it. I was adamant that we needed to leave the apartment that instant. I was shaking so hard, but I grabbed a pillowcase and started throwing clothes into it. I wasn't going to get a duffel bag from the closet. We went to a hotel that night, and that's where we stayed for 3 nights. Each night, I lied awake curled in her arms, watching the corners of the hotel room. A figure bled apart from the shadows, and just stood there for 3 nights. It was tall and thin, black as night. It didn't have any distinct facial features, but black, decaying skin was stretched taut against a bony humanoid skull. It had no eyes, just sunken eye sockets covered with flat skin. It has a mouth full of sharp, jagged teeth, shiny with saliva that dripped onto the floor. My friend tried to convince me to go back, and by day 3, she was saying we didn't have any extra money to be spending on a hotel. We had to go back and figure out what the thing was. I was reluctant because she was right. We were out of money, but the thing didn't seem as active as when we were at home. But whatever it was getting braver, and it wasn't going to stop until it had what it wanted. We returned home in the middle of the day. I was shaking by the time it was time to go to bed. We hid under the blankets, knowing it was waiting for the sun to set so it could come out. The closet door groaned on its hinges as the creature began to come out. We could hear its drool splashing to the floor, its footsteps as it trudged towards the bed. Tears started streaking down my face as I held onto my best friend tightly under the comforter. And that's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl, so faint I thought I was imagining it. It grew louder and I let out a gasp of recognition. I knew that protective growl, but how? How could it be? The growl sounded like it was in the room, and we felt something leap on the bed. A small, compact shape. 4 little points of pressure as the growl turned into a threatening yowl. I peeked out from under the comforter, and at the edge of the bed was Azriel, translucent and slightly shimmering. Her back was arched, fur on end as she caterwauled at the creature standing halfway out of the closet. It snapped its teeth and made a grotesque slurp, disappearing back into the closet. The door shut by itself. Azriel's fur flattened, but she still remained rooted at the edge of the bed, staring at the door. She let out a final hiss and turned towards us. I patted my lap, too emotional to speak her name. She was really here. Her familiar, content purr reverberated throughout the room. "You're really here," I said softly, as I held out my hand to pat her. As she bumped her nose against my hand, I noticed I could see almost completely through her. Well, almost all here. "You came back to protect me." To this day, I still don't know if Azriel has protected me from the thing from the very beginning, but every night now to the right of my head, there's a warm circular indentation. Just as I fall asleep, I hear a soft purr, and if that door even creaks, I hear a warning hiss. The house I can't go back to sits on reservation land nestled in the woods. I'm not affiliated with the tribe, it's just cheaper to live out there. Maybe now I have a better understanding of why. My driveway is a dirt turnoff on the highway, unremarkable except for the forest and thick vegetation that renders the property semi-isolated. The roar of traffic from the casino keeps the rent down, even if it does keep me up a few nights a week. You almost get used to it after a while. After a while, you don't even hear it. But not last night. There must have been some event going on at the casino, some concert or fundraiser, because the cars were screaming by into the early hours. I didn't go to sleep until around 2 in the morning. and even then I roused bleary-eyed an hour later. I wasn't sure what woke me. All seemed deathly still out on the road. An eerie vacuum when the night's Daytona 500 had been. I burrowed down and tried to get back to sleep. I was awake again a little while later when I noticed the automatic porch light had come on. This isn't unusual. Like I said, the area around my house is pretty densely wooded. I get a lot of late night visitors, possums and raccoons, investigating my garbage cans before they blunder off to ill fates on the busy highway. I had taken to securing the lids with bungee cord, but even that extra measure only worked about half the time. The creatures that live in these woods are resourceful to the point of uncanniness, and I don't mean that as a garbage pun. I soon realized it wasn't the outside light that had woken me, but a sound. There was someone knocking at my front door. I shook the remaining sleep off me and rolled to look out the window. The upper story of the house is a loft accessed by an old carpeted set of stairs. My bed was pushed right up against the window, and I could see out past the crest of roof and identify who was standing on the porch. There was no one. Some member of the Nocturnalia, then. And unless the possums had sprouted hands, the knocking was just a wind-blown tree branch raking against a far corner of the house. The light clicked off, and relief flooded through me as the shadows floated back into place outside. Swaddled in this explanation, I rolled over to go back to sleep. The light blazed back on, and the knocking resumed, way more insistent this time. I bolted upright in bed. There was no more denying the sound or where it came from. I checked again out the upstairs window and saw no one. Still, the knocks volleyed, fast and urgent. The noise finally drove me out of bed and down the stairs to investigate. Up until this point I hadn't been afraid, not truly. Like I said, triggered lights and unexplained noises happen all the time when you live in the woods. But as I neared the landing, my heart started to beat in time to the rhythm savaging my door. I shouted something, some threat, go away or back off, or I have a gun. A part of me couldn't be sure I wasn't dreaming. I knew that in half a second, I wouldn't have the stones to open the door. I wrenched it open. There was no one there. I looked down. The thing hiding in plain sight on my doorstep seized my ankle, and I fell. I had been so stupid, looking out when all along the thing had been just below. Just below. I screamed as it lashed onto me. As soon as I was down, it began to climb, heaving its tortured anatomy in alignment with my own. Nothing matched up. I nearly blacked out when I saw the face surging to meet me. The lower mandible of the jaw dangled by a hinge, the thing's tongue like a fat, loose worm slamming a trail up my chest. Ropes of pink drool hung from its tattered gums. It gasped and rattled as it came. Its right eye rolled in its head, fixing on me, and fixing on the ruined left half of its face, where the other eye dangled uselessly by a nerve. The imbecilic expression made it seem almost shocked by its own predicament. I shoved the thing off of me and rolled out from underneath it. I was on my feet and running for the stairs, bolting up to my bedroom hands over feet. The terrible thing I had left inside couldn't possibly make it up that amount of steps after me. I had a moment to breathe, to think. I turned back to the foyer. I forced myself to look. A low moan of terror started in my chest, building to a scream when I saw it, because the thing was coming up the stairs after me, swimming up the steps one elbow stroke at a time, pulling along the legs set backwards on its trunk. Its spine twisted like the whole track had derailed with the train, and it kept coming, dragging its own fall, like some horrible imperative drove it. Like with its unfixed eyes, I was all it could see now. I stumbled back, groping behind me, and reached into the yawning mouth of my closet as another mouth yawned toward me. My fingers closed over the peeling athletic tape of my old baseball bat. I've never been a violent person. My whole life I've mostly been a coward, which explains my short-lived baseball career, and the wet stain darkening the front of my pajama bottoms. But something came uncoupled inside me in that moment, terror splitting my mind wide like a bad egg, and letting the yolk of rational thought drain away. The thing reached the top step and reared, roller coaster spine causing it to nearly fall over backwards down the stairs. I struck. I brought my bat down like an avenging angel driving out the devil, and I was screaming. I don't know if I had ever stopped since opening the door. I pulped the thing until it expired there on the stairs, and then I kept on beating at it, screaming, until my frenzy finally drove me from the house. I ran pell-mell for the highway. There were lights pulsing there, strobing red and blue through the trees. I slipped in a runnel of liquid, caught myself on the bat, plunged on. I didn't stop running until I saw the squad cars and men in uniform gathered on the road. I immediately latched onto one of the officers I recognized from town, sobbing and babbling. I'm lucky the guy didn't blow me away. "The house," I croaked. "In the house. You live around here?" The officer drew me aside and closer to where the fire crew was just pulling up. I noticed the smoking, twisted vestiges of a car overturned in the ditch, the hood crushed and windows blown out. So that's why the police were out here this late. Whoever had been behind the wheel, their tragedy was my salvation. We're still looking for the driver. The officer explained when he noticed the direction of my gaze. Blonde female, early 30s. It's a miracle she managed to pull herself from the wreck. An impact like that should have mangled and killed the person driving. His morbid congeniality wore off when he noticed the expression on my face. He trained his flashlight beam on me and swept it along the length of my baseball bat, illuminating the blood and blonde tuft of hair on the business end. I met Gabriel in freshman year of college, in the lecture hall of my Foundations of Drawing class. It was the first day of school. None of us knew each other. There were 2 left-handed desks crammed into the first row, and we were both lefties. Sometimes becoming acquainted is as simple as that. Gabe and I quickly grew closer, as we discovered that we rode our bikes down the same road every morning to get to campus. We both ducked our heads in quiet embarrassment when models posed in the nude for our figure drawing class. We both showed up to the corner cafe 2 blocks from the dorms at duskfall. Gabe loved people watching, just gazing out at the slowly darkening street until the wisp of steam coming off his mug petered out and the streetlights flickered on. I sipped my spiced coffee and doodled in my sketchbook. When a year went by and fall came back around and we didn't feel so much like 2 little boys lost in the bigger world, we moved out of our respective dorm rooms and got an apartment together. Gabe had the tiny room in the back with the ratty carpet. I slept on the couch, and the kitchen table was for drawing. Our landlord was a cranky old woman, and if nothing fearful and unusual ever happened, I'm sure she would have kept our security deposit for staining the glossy wood with paint. Looking back on it, I was friends with Gabe for a remarkably long time before I noticed anything unusual about him. When I finally did come around to it, it happened entirely by accident. I remember that it was a cold Monday morning that teetered on the edge of winter. Having just gotten out of bed, in my groggy, half-asleep state, I staggered to the bathroom and opened the door without thinking. It knocked into something before it could open all the way, and I heard Gabe's slightly muffled yelp. Realizing the bathroom was occupied, I stammered an apology and began to close the door when I caught a glimpse of the mirror. By all means, from my position, I should have been able to see any occupant in the bathroom, but all I saw through the mirror were the white tiled walls and the towel rack. "Gabe?" I said carefully. There was no answer. My brain rationalized that I had misheard his voice, and I pushed on the door again. Something shuffled back inside the room. Then the door swung open all the way. A chill went down my back. Gabriel was standing in front of the sink, holding a razor with his dimpled chin draped in white foam. His eyes stared straight ahead, and in the gaps of the shaving foam, I could see that his lips were tense. I glanced at the mirror. The bathroom reflected in it was empty. I looked back at my roommate. Gabe exhaled slowly. "Act like everything's normal," he said quietly. He turned his head and I flinched. His eyes settled on mine and he gazed at me steadily. "Please," he said. "Let's not talk about this again." I clutched the doorknob. "Okay." I swallowed a cold lump in my throat, then I nodded stiffly. Gabe smiled, but I could tell it was forced. I backed away from the door and gently pulled it closed. Then I went to my couch and sat on it cross-legged, staring at the floor. 5 minutes later, Gabe came out of the bathroom, cleanly shaven. "You can use the bathroom now," he said. He was smiling a real smile this time, like everything was okay. "Leo?" I stared up at him. His eyes softened with something resembling pity. "You look like you've seen a ghost. You okay?" I fidgeted with my blankets to get the cold sweat off my palms. Then I managed the best nod that I could. "Yeah," I breathed. "Yeah, everything's okay." Gabe never brought the incident up again. I did my best to act like nothing was unusual. but I couldn't help but steal glances at car windows and polished storefronts whenever I walked with him, shuddering when I saw only myself in the reflection. No mirror or glossy surface could show me the image of my roommate, not even the puddles on the roadside after the cold winter rain. "I wish you could tell me how," I said one evening, as we sat on the patio table of our old corner cafe. Gabe's shoulders slumped ever so slightly, and he took his eyes off the dusky blue street. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I know you do." That morning, when I looked in the bathroom mirror, I flicked my wrist a bit too quickly, a careless stroke on my toned, gray sketchbook. My pencil was snapped at its tip. Gabe rummaged in his pocket and handed me his pocket knife, and I used its tiny, iridescent blade to slowly sharpen my pencil, exposing the soft lead again bit by bit. When the silence became unbearable, Gabe finally let out a small sigh. "I'm no different than most, Leah," he said. "Think of it like the difference between having brown eyes or blue eyes. Either way, you can be a perfectly regular person." "But," Gabe smiled slightly, "let's act like everything's normal, okay? I know it's selfish, but it makes me happy." I wanted to protest, but Gabe began to stand up like we were done talking. I reluctantly followed, and we walked home in silence. The following Tuesday, 3 buildings on campus were evacuated and shut down from a reported bomb threat. One of them was where our drawing and composition class was supposed to be, so Gabe and I got a fortuitous afternoon off. I drove the two of us to a nearby burger joint to get lunch, and we sat at the old-style diner table with classic 80s rock playing on the overhead speakers. I slid my basket of garlic fries to him. "You should try it. It's really good." Gabe stared at me strangely. "What?" I asked. He sat back against the shiny red seat back, pushed up his glasses, and crossed his arms. "Leo, why don't you trust me?" I felt my face flush. What do you mean?" "Don't try to play dumb. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you wearing a crucifix on a necklace? You never wore jewelry before last week." My hand scrambled to my neck without my permission. The neckline of my t-shirt hung lower than I expected. The tiny silver cross dangled just above my collar. "What do you think I am, Leo?" Gabe smiled sadly. "That's a little funny," he said. "That you believe in fairy tales? You're a college student, and you think your roommate might be... It's not like that." Gabe reached over, took a garlic fry, and ate it. Some part of me, deep down inside, twisted in excitement and fear. Nothing happened. "I hate to break it to you," Gabe said, "but vampires aren't real." "I need you to tell me why, then," I said quickly, trying to hide my embarrassment. "Why what?" "Why you don't have a reflection?" Gabe glanced around at the chattering people all around us. I could tell he didn't want to talk, especially in a crowded restaurant at lunchtime, but I wasn't going to let him drop the ball again. He must have realized that, because he sighed grudgingly. "You ever watched the Disney version of Peter Pan?" he asked. "You just laughed at me for not believing in fairy tales." "This is a metaphor. You know how Peter Pan loses his shadow, and how the shadow runs away from him with a mind of its own?" "You lost your reflection?" He nodded grimly. "I don't know if it's something that can happen to everyone," he said. "I've never seen anyone else without a reflection, but maybe what?" Gabe sat back in his chair again, averting his eyes. I watched him, waiting, until he leaned in stiffly and spoke in a low voice. "Maybe I'm not so special, Leo. Have you thought about that? Maybe all reflections are creatures of their own, and they just haven't come out of the mirror yet." There is a thin line between shy and fearful. Gabe was shy, but I had never once seen him afraid. At that moment, for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. His apprehension scared me. He took in a short breath. When he opened his mouth again, his words came faster, one after another. "Maybe everyone's reflections are always watching from the other side of the mirror," he said. "And when you're a terrible enough person, they get fed up, and then they crawl out of the mirror and close their hands around your throat and choke you until you're half dead, and whisper nightmarish things in your ear to haunt you for the rest of your life, and run away never to be seen again, ever." I stared at him, wide-eyed. It's not true, I muttered. Is it? Did that really happen? Gabe said nothing. I wanted to believe he was lying, that this was all somehow an elaborate prank, but Gabriel had no reflection, and I couldn't deny what I had seen. Gabe quietly cleared his throat, took his elbows off the table, and fidgeted with the case of his tiny iridescent pocket knife. I've said too much. Why did your reflection think you were a terrible person? Leo, please, let's act like everything's normal. Everything isn't normal, I said, my tone verging on a plea. What did you do? I don't want to talk about it. What did your reflection tell you? I don't... I flinched. It wasn't like Gabe to raise his voice. From a table across the aisle, a couple of kids looked at us curiously. Gabe averted his eyes. I don't want to talk about it, he said. I did something I wasn't proud of, okay? But what's past is past. I wish you would think of me as the perfectly normal person that I am now. I had trouble sleeping that night. I tossed and turned in my blankets, drifting in and out of vague nightmares that I didn't know the beginnings or endings of. I kept thinking about what Gabe had said. My mind went in circles, speculating on what terrible thing he could have done to make his reflection come after him. I chastised myself at every turn for entertaining such a ridiculous idea, that reflections could be sentient entities, and that they could crawl out of a mirror to this side of the world. Yet my breath was still tinged with the scent of garlic, because I had been too scared to stand in the bathroom to brush my teeth. It felt like my eyes in the mirror were watching my every movement. It must have been well past midnight when I heard the kitchen window slide open. There was soft breathing, the sound of careful footsteps on the tiles, the shuffle of cloth, and after a short pause, the horribly familiar sound of one of our large kitchen knives sliding out of the wooden knife block. Perhaps it was the wintry air coming in through the open window. Perhaps it wasn't, but a sinister cold feeling settled at the back of my neck. I laid on my couch, paralyzed. Quiet footsteps made their way out of the kitchen and began to approach. When they came close, in a momentary feat of courage, I opened my eyes in slits from between my blankets. The diffused glow of the streetlights illuminated a single, unmistakable face. Gabriel. Except it wasn't. Even in the dim lighting, I could see that everything about him was simply wrong. His ever-present cable-knit beanie was gone, and his dark hair hung in damp, uncombed tufts. He wore a torn gray jacket with its collar flipped up. His glasses were the thin wire-rimmed ones he used to wear in freshman year. He held our German chef's knife in his right hand. The right-handed Gabe hadn't noticed that I was awake. As I laid frozen in my blankets, he slowly turned away and began walking toward the back of the apartment. Desperately praying that the intruder couldn't hear the blankets shifting on my body, I reached out to grab my phone from the coffee table, but before I could try to call the police, before I could even wrap my trembling fingers around my phone, the footsteps disappeared into the carpeted back room. The next thing I heard was Gabe's scream. Without thinking, I threw off my blankets, stumbled to my feet, and made a mad dash for Gabe's room. I slammed my palm on the light switch and was greeted by a scene of my nightmares. There was so much blood. For a moment, it was all I could see. Blood spattered on the silvery wallpaper, and on Gabe's proudest and most beautiful paintings that he mounted on black cardstock and hung on his wall. Blood all over the cozy twin bed. I gripped the doorway as a wave of nausea threatened to bring me down to my knees. My roommate, the Gabe I knew, the Gabe who combed his hair neatly and put his horn-rimmed glasses on his nightstand and went to bed in soft fleece pajamas, was pinned to the corner between the edge of his bed and the wall, his shirt slashed to pieces, and the heavy blade of the kitchen knife stuck half an inch deep in his chest. Bent over him was the intruder, the stranger who wore the guise of my friend, steadily pressing down on the hilt of his knife. Gabe let out a strained moan that might have been my name. The intruder turned his face toward me. Madness pulsed in his bloodshot eyes. The mask that he wore was so familiar that seeing anything other than Gabe in his expression was sickening. "Don't move a fucking inch," he snarled in my roommate's voice. "If you know what's good for you." I stared back at him, pathetically unable even to make a sound. The intruder turned back to Gabe and laughed. "I've finally caught you," he breathed. "You knew I was coming, didn't you? I'd have given anything to blow you and your pretty little world to dust. It's a pity, but this'll do just fine." Gabe's arms and legs spasmed. struggling to break free, but he was helplessly trapped. "Look at me, you fucking monster," the intruder hissed, words pushing through hysteria. "This was supposed to be my life. Do you hear me? All this was supposed to be mine." The sickening crunch of bone turned my insides. The kitchen knife sank up to its hilt in flesh and blood. Gabe howled, his voice echoing down the neighborhood. Then, without a sound save for a small cough, he fell limp. "Die." The right-handed stranger muttered through his teeth, "Go back to hell where you belong." He was met with no answer. Everything was silent. Slowly, the intruder turned to me again. His lips trembled before spreading into a thin smile. "Why, hello there," he whispered. "You must be my roommate." I took half a step back. The room tilted back and forth. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I've come to liberate you from this monster. Has he told you about me? Did he relish the way he tortured me? Did you know I even existed?" Behind him, swaddled in bloody sheets, I thought I saw Gabe's hand twitch. My eyes widened. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Before I could say a word, Gabe, the real Gabe, heaved himself upright, pulled his pocket knife from underneath his pillow, snapped open its tiny iridescent blade, and sank it deep into the side of his doppelganger's neck. The plastered-on smile on his face stiffened. Blood spurted from his wound. Manic adrenaline pumped the stranger's life out onto the ratty carpet, and in less than a minute, he was a white corpse on the floor. Gabe slumped back onto his bed. His eyes rolled back in his head. I stumbled into the room on puppet limbs, my ears ringing and my stomach twisted in knots, and clamped my hands around his bloodied, slicked pajamas. "Gabe?" I gasped, shoving my limp body up into his arms. "Gabriel, stay with me." His head lolled. In my completely rattled state of mind, I somehow found the clarity to refrain from pulling the kitchen knife out of his chest for fear he would lose more blood. I tore the sheets off his bed and twisted it as tightly as I could around his chest. "Oh God," I muttered, slamming the apartment door open and carrying Gabe down the stairs. "Oh God, why is this happening?" I tried not to feel how cold he had become. Tried not to gauge how much blood we were leaving smeared on the stairs behind us. I especially tried to not look at where the knife had pierced his flesh, square in the middle of the chest, if not for its slight, very calculated tilt leftwards, broken clean through the ribcage. The drive to the emergency room was a blur. There were no cars on the road. As soon as we got to the hospital, people began shouting. White-clad medical staff barking orders. Someone wrestled Gabe's body out of my arms. I found myself sitting in the ER waiting room, staring down at the rusty stains on my bare feet. It was deep, deep into the cold, lonely night when the doors to the hallway slid open and a uniformed man walked out. "Are you with the young man who came in at 1:20? "He didn't come in," I said hoarsely. "Is he alive?" "The doctors are working on him right now," he said. "I wanted to ask you something." "Working on him? As in he can be saved?" The man pursed his lips. "Is Gabe alive or not?" I snapped. "He is." My shoulders relaxed, just a little bit. I breathed out and sat back in my chair. It's actually about that," the man said. "About what?" "About your friend being alive. Are you aware of anything unusual about him?" I looked away. The man shuffled his feet. When I looked back at him, he looked nervous, like he expected me to say something terrible. "It's nothing unusual," he said. "Treat it like everything's normal." When I finally got to visit Gabe, he had regained enough motor control to sit up and draw again. For a long while, I just watched him sketch on his lap. "I'm sorry I couldn't do anything," I said. I was scared." Gabe paused. His pencil hovered over the paper as he pushed up his glasses with his other hand. "It's okay," he said. "I don't blame you." "Do you believe him? About how you're a monster?" Gabe averted his eyes. Silence hung between us long enough for him to resume sketching. Faces bloomed on the page. Strangers out of the imagination. "The doctors told me something," I said. "They asked if I knew anything unusual about you. I thought they were talking about the reflection at first, but there's something else too, isn't there?" Gabe tensed. He didn't say anything. They told me how you survived the stab wound. You have your heart in the right side of your chest. It's you, isn't it? I said. You're the one who came out of the mirror. I could almost feel the air in the room grow colder. Gabe's eyes were dark, unreadable. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. He was a terrible person. I nodded. When I went back to the apartment to wrap the garbage bag onto his corpse, I had seen the old bruised scars around his neck, the shadows under his eyes from being haunted by a supernatural wrath. Everything around him was miserable, Gabe muttered. Miserable or dead. He was a maniac. I should have killed him when I first had the chance. He's gone now, I said. Gabe nodded, then he took a shaky breath. I killed him, he said. I killed a person, Leo. What am I gonna do? We'll figure it out, I said, as reassuringly as I could manage with a dead body rotting back in my apartment. Gabe smiled weakly. Figure it out, he repeated. Yeah. He let out a small chuckle and shook his head. The movement made him sway, and I rushed to help him lie back down on his soft white pillow. I came out because I wanted to meet humans like you, he said quietly. Humans who deserve to know the better half of me. Outside, in the distance, the wail of police sirens began to fill the morning fog. I moved back to Savannah after going away to my 4-year college in North Carolina. I decided to come back because all my family lived there, and it was a very inclusive and loving town. With a degree, I was going to look for some jobs in business. But I needed a quick job to make some money while I was building my business modules and trying to figure out where I wanted to work long term. I would go into town and brief different businesses and try to find some quick part-time jobs to get into. When I was downtown getting lunch the second week I was back, I saw an offer for a nighttime watch guard for $20 an hour. I thought that was a pretty good way to start out and just get something small going. So I looked at the number on the paper and called them and left a message. They ended up calling me back the next morning. The woman who called me on the phone seemed to be confused and elderly, almost like she was being forced to talk to me, or as if she was reading a script. She would keep pausing and stuttering on her words. Hello, miss. We got a call from you yesterday that you were, interested in our nighttime post position? Yeah. I saw the flyer downtown and was wondering if I could be considered for the job, or if I needed an interview. She told me that would not be necessary. I could come in that night, and the boss would brief me and show me what I would be doing. I was a little turned off by this, considering most good businesses give an interview and care about who they are hiring. I decided that it would be fine considering it was a city-run museum, so it couldn't be too sketchy. I went into the museum at 7:30 that night when the old lady on the phone asked me to. When I got there, the door was unlocked and I walked in to meet the boss, I guess. I didn't know at the time. He was tall, with dark hair and large green eyes. He thanked me for coming and kept smiling, but his eyes looked deep and lifeless, like he was trying to read me, not give me a job. He kept telling me I was exactly what they were looking for, and that his assistant told him I had the prettiest blue eyes. I froze. I told him I spoke to her on the phone, and that she never actually saw me. I realized this job was not worth the money, and after the briefing, I would just tell him I couldn't do it. We were walking into the back and he showed me all the cameras, and said all you have to do is just watch the cameras and make sure nothing bad happens. He said, it's a pretty simple job. Nothing really goes down ever. I've been working here for 15 years and never had a problem. I felt a bit more at ease and decided maybe I would just work tonight and make a quick $220 for 11 hours. Either way, I could just sleep, right? I made sure to tell my family where I was and exactly what I was doing, just in case. The boss told me everything will be fine, gave me the walkie and his number, told me my shift was from 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. He said he would be back at 7 a.m. sharp to make sure everything went well. I was less concerned about the weird woman who had called me back when I saw he was wearing a city shirt and had a name tag that said, City of Savannah Hospitalities Department. I asked him about it, and he said he was pretty much an expendable resource, as in he worked for many different departments for the city. A few minutes later, he was leaving as soon as he came, and left me a set of keys on the desk in case I needed them. The museum is big, 3 floors, and has a lot of open space. There were 5 monitors for each of the entrances, and 1 for the major hall of the museum. I sat down and decided to just go on my phone for a bit, and maybe work on some of my resumes. About an hour in, at around 9:15, I heard sounds coming from the roof above me. I looked at the camera stationed on the second floor entrance, and I saw an elderly woman standing there, staring in, banging at the door. I waited over 45 minutes for her to go away, but she would just keep standing there and staring in. I froze and decided to go confront her, considering the doors were locked and she couldn't get to me. When I went down there, she started screaming, "He's going to come in," over and over again. I freaked out and went back to my desk to write down the occurrence like I was told to do. If anything out of the ordinary happened, which I must say, I did find a bit odd. A few minutes later, she started banging on the window quite forcefully and aggressively. I decided to just call 911 and inform them of the occurrence, and they could take her away. I assumed she was just a confused homeless woman, and maybe she needed some help. Anyway, when I called 911, the operator did answer immediately, but I could tell right away something was wrong. She said, "Hello, this is 911. What may your emergency be?" And I told her quickly that there was someone trying to break into the museum. I'll leave specifics out for privacy reasons. I initially noted the fact she sounded quite old to be a 911 operator. I would guess in her 70s or 80s. She then said, "Oh, honey, don't worry. We know she is outside. She just wants to chat. Maybe you should go say hello." After this, my heart dropped when I went to look at the camera and the door she was at. I realized she wasn't banging anymore, but she seemed to be turned around talking on the phone. I very quickly started to freak out and lose my breath. I have bad anxiety, and for a moment, I almost thought I was going crazy, and a massive pit formed in my stomach. I realized I knew that old lady's voice. It was the same one who called me about the job opportunity in the first place. I decided to call the boss. Sorry I forgot to mention his name was Barry, at least on his name tag anyway. He answered and said to not look in her eyes or to open the door to her. I decided to just lay low and lock the door and stay in the security room. I told him about the 911 call and how I was almost certain she somehow picked up the phone. He got silent for a long time and seemed like he was thinking about it deeply. He then said I should turn off my phone and make sure to not open the door, no matter what I heard outside of the security room. He also said quickly, "I'm so sorry for the troubles. I'll pay you for 40 an hour instead of 20. Just please don't inform anyone of what you saw or heard. Just stay in there till morning and you will be fine." He hung up before I could even get another word in. I didn't turn off my phone like he said. I didn't think my only way to distract myself was a good idea to shut off. I went on socials and did some reading to pass the time. At around 3:15 a.m., I started hearing what sounded like bells coming from outside the door. I really was thinking if this money was worth it at all, but I knew I probably just shouldn't have taken the sketchy job in the first place. Then I heard her voice, but it was different than before. It seemed to always be changing pitch and tone, probably why I didn't recognize it right away on the phone. She said, "Sweetie, do you mind coming out so you can please help me?" And very quickly, the kind words turned into inaudible screaming and banging at the door. There was no way whatever that was a little old lady. The strength it possessed begged to differ. It lasted for about 30 minutes, so when I finally heard the jingling of the bells moving away and the heavy footsteps stop. Finally, at 7, Barry showed up and told me I could unlock the door. He apologized and paid me right there in cash. He also told me to leave right away and to not return. He said I may get a phone call from her again and to just ignore it. It's been about a week now, and I'm not sure how else to explain this occurrence. I was wondering if anyone had any ideas on what this thing may have been. My husband vanished 2 months ago. The last time I saw him was in the middle of the night when he got up from our bed. He mumbled that he had to use the bathroom and walked around our bed to the door. The pale glare of the streetlight illuminated the outline of his naked body, and I could see his junk was semi-hard. I smiled, thinking about what we could do in the morning, and drifted back to sleep. In the morning, I woke up and realized I was alone in the bed. There was no warm, comforting body beside me, only the wide, cool expanse of rumpled sheets and blankets. I called out his name, and when he didn't respond, I got to my feet and searched each room in our small apartment. He wasn't sleeping on the couch in the living room, where he sometimes moved when my snoring got too loud, nor was he in the kitchen, the bathroom, or the second bedroom we converted into a little office. I only started to get worried when I saw that his keychain was still on our floral key rack, and that both of our cars were in the rear parking lot. I wanted to hope that he had gone on an early morning walk, even though he'd never been a morning person, but all his shoes were still lined up neatly by the door. So I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, trying to work out where he could have gone. Finally, I forced myself to stand up, then made my way back to the bedroom and got my iPhone. I called his smartphone first, only to hear it ringing in our bedroom. Then I started calling close friends. After an hour passed, I started calling acquaintances, then his work. Finally, painfully, I started to dial his family. In the afternoon, I finally drove to the police station to file a missing persons report. The officer who interviewed me asked me the usual questions about my husband, and then started suggesting places I might have forgotten to check. He was concerned that my husband might have been in an accident somewhere, but he was sure that my husband would be found. He must have had a spare set of keys, after all, and he probably had a spare set of boots I didn't know about. I wanted to believe them. I was ashamed of all the locations I hadn't thought to check, and I made calls to every business in my area, then started to drive up and down the streets in our neighborhood. I even called all the hospitals in the city, and asked if anyone matching my husband's description had been admitted as a patient. Turned up nothing. After a day, the police came. The detective assigned to my case was a very nice man who reviewed all the questions the officer had asked the day before. He also asked if I had noticed anything unusual about my husband, or whether he had behaved oddly in the past month or so. He wondered aloud if my husband had run off with the mistress, or had another family somewhere. The problem with all of his theories is that none of them had any evidence. None of my husband's clothes were missing, as far as I could tell. No cash had been withdrawn from our bank accounts. Even his wallet was still resting in the nightstand beside our bed. It's possible he could have been withdrawing money from his paycheck for years in amounts too small for me to notice. It's possible that he could have been so cautious about it that he put thousands of dollars aside, then put on a completely new set of clothes and a new pair of shoes before walking out in the cold January night and going to a car he'd bought without my knowledge, that was not registered in his name, and going I don't know where. I wish that made sense, but it would require a sense of preparation that borders on obsessive. He would have had to start planning to disappear as soon as he met me. Now is the point in these types of stories where I'm supposed to reveal the big twist. Maybe it's that my husband always said he was afraid of the thing behind the walls, or that he was a fugitive from the future. But this isn't that kind of story. This is real life, where mysteries sometimes don't get solved, no matter how much you yearn with all your soul to get an answer, no matter how much you cry and scream into your pillow at night, with the lonely aching void where someone else used to be surrounding you and taunting you with its emptiness. I wish I knew that a monster had eaten my husband. I wish police from the future had left a note that I'd married a criminal. Instead, I sit here, on the couch we bought together, and which still has the shallow furlough in the center that shows where my husband used to sleep. I can't stay here with the ghosts of all these memories and the constant mockery of what might have been, but I can't leave in case he comes back. That's it. There's nothing more. I would give anything if there was. I'm sitting at my desk at work, inattentively staring out of the closest window, when I first noticed how unusually dark it was outside. There was a cloud in the sky that I could see. A quick search through the weather app on my phone confirmed that today was supposed to be sunny. It looked like my little town was midway through a sunset, but at 1 in the afternoon with the sun clearly visible above, I was struck by a feeling of unease but was quickly able to brush it off. I joked to myself that the sun was probably feeling as lazy as I was today. The somber view outside made it feel like it was later in the day than it was. I was itching to get out of the office and left a little early. I promised my boss that I would stay later on Friday. I knew I probably wouldn't. I was greeted by my wonderful wife Laura when I arrived home. The sight of her quelled any lingering nervousness. We always watched the news together before we head up to bed at night. We couldn't help but aim jokes at the meteorologist when he was giving his nightly forecast of the week's weather. A week and some change passed before Laura admitted she was beginning to worry about the darkness. Her concern caused me to focus my attention on it again. I realized just how dark it had become. I felt like a frog nervously sitting in a pot while someone slowly cranks up the heat. The meteorologist that we normally tune in to listen to went about as if nothing was amiss. Sunny with a slight chance of rain in the evening was tomorrow's forecast. On the screen, nothing seemed wrong, but throughout the neighborhood, there was a nervous, frantic energy that had almost become palpable. A couple of weeks passed before there was no longer a distinguishable day. Every morning, there was a sunrise. Every night, there was a sunset. The sun still took its usual path across the sky, but it was as if none of its light was managing to make the journey to Earth, or at least the little section of Earth that I call home. No one really smiled anymore. Everyone seemed to rush from place to place. It was almost as if they thought that hunching over and increasing their stride would help them come out on the other end of the darkness quicker. Most of our neighbors are pretty enjoyable to be around. The couple living in the house to our left, Rodney and Allison, usually visit us 2 or 3 times a week. We've gotten to know them pretty well, and I started asking them over more frequently. The darkness brought a sense of loneliness with it. Laura and I don't have children, so it's just us most of the time. I remember the first time they shared their concern about the darkness with us. They are both generally very reserved, so it was a couple of weeks after things started to get dark before the topic came up. We were sitting on our sectional in the living room, Laura and I on one half, and them on the other. We had been sitting there silently for a couple of minutes when Allison spoke up. "What do we do if it just doesn't stop?" "Huh?" Rodney muttered. I think he had started dozing off. "What if we have to live like it's night forever? It's starting to drive me insane." Laura chimed in. "I can hardly sleep at night, or what I assume is nights. It feels like being forced out of a schedule I've followed for decades." There was a hint of panic in her voice. I tried to be reassuring. "Guys, it's probably just some weird weather anomaly." "You heard the news? They have no idea what's going on," Allison said, nearly cutting me off. "Maybe it's something new, something they haven't seen before. Nothing has hurt us, has it? We just need to wait it out." Rodney spoke up again. "But it's been weeks. If it's something that'll pass, it must be covering an insane amount of land." I had a plan. "After work tomorrow, we'll meet here. File into my SUV and hop on the highway. We'll drive until we pass this, whatever it is." Allison seemed to like the suggestion. "Oh, it'd be great to feel some sunlight again. And maybe we get an idea of how long we need to wait until it passes. Let's go for it." At work the following day, I realized I couldn't see as far off into the distance as I once could, despite the streetlights that were now permanently turned on down every road. It was like the darkness had become so absolute that it was canceling out the pathetic attempt the bulbs were making to drive it away. I swear before I left the office at the start of the evening, a few more buildings had been engulfed. I felt like I was in a video game that was failing to render the world around me quick enough. This made me all the more motivated to get home, pick up Rodney, Allison, and Laura, and get back on the road. I was dying to see some natural light again. Rodney and Allison were already at the house when I got home. After a quick change of clothes, we all hurried into my SUV, and I pulled out onto the road. The highway was vacant except for a couple of other cars. I think people felt the most comfortable staying holed up in their houses with the blinds closed, pretending things were continuing as normal outside. Laura and I even discussed sticking some lights against our windows behind the blinds to make it look like sunlight was trying to leak through when they were closed. Considering how close I was to ordering those lights, I think we may be losing our minds. As we continued driving, it appeared as if we were approaching the darkness, like it was standing its ground instead of retreating at the sight of the car's headlights. Eventually we were forced to come to a stop when we reached a wall of darkness so absolute, it swallowed any and all light. Not a thing was visible beyond it. I flipped on my high beams. Still nothing. Several other cars had also stopped with their passengers staring in the darkness dumbfounded. One man in a pickup truck, who was visibly frustrated, decided to try and drive through it. As soon as the bed of his truck disappeared, the sound of the truck's engine and its tires on the road did as well. "What the hell is that?" Laura yelled. I turned towards her. "Your guess is as good as mine. I've never seen anything like it." Rodney chimed in from the back seat. "You're out of your mind if you think I'm letting you drive me through that thing. You think I planned on getting anywhere near it?" As I turned around to face Rodney, I saw that Allison was transfixed by the sight of the darkness and had started to shake. I don't think she handles stressful situations very well. We'll head back. I'm taking off work tomorrow and heading straight to the municipal building down the road. I'll demand they tell me what they're doing about this. They have to have some plan, right? "Yeah, I'm sure our representatives have been working around the clock," Rodney said sarcastically. "They probably hopped on a plane out of here weeks ago." "Alright, do you have a better plan?" After a brief moment of silence, I put the car in drive and started heading back into town. When I woke up the next morning, I saw that darkness had crept a bit closer. I think this is when it really set in how serious this issue was. I'd tried to give it as little thought as possible up until now, but I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if it never stops. I really didn't know what to say or who to ask to speak to when I arrived at our local municipal building. There were no other people other than the staff that I could see in the building. The waiting area was empty. I walked up to the lady sitting at the front desk. I figured I'd explain why I was there to her, and she'd point me in the right direction. As I approached, she looked up with a large smile on her face. "Hello, is there anything I can help you with?" Yeah. I need to know what's been done about the darkness. Surely the township is focusing some serious resources on the issue. You need to be more specific, sir. Is there a streetlight or some digital sign that is no longer working? I can grab the paperwork for you to file a complaint. I stopped her before she left her chair to grab the form. No, that darkness. It's a little more than just a streetlight. I pointed out of the window to my left. Sir, I'm not quite sure what you're pointing to. The darkness. The constant oppressive darkness. Are you not worried that it's getting closer? She looked at me with a combination of fear and pity. I think she believed I was insane. She forced a smile back onto her face. Let me just make a quick phone call, and I'll have someone escort you to the proper area to discuss that issue. As she lifted herself from her chair and walked into a room in the back, I bolted out of the building. What the hell is wrong with her? How could she not be worried? When I explained everything to Laura, she decided to call our local police station. She was met with similar confusion, and was even given the number to a mental health clinic. Feeling utterly defeated, I resigned to attempting to convince myself that everything that was happening was just a dream. I'd surely wake up any minute now with Laura next to me in bed, and a nice warm sunlight streaming in through our window. It's been a couple of weeks since I visited our township's municipal building. The darkness has consumed everything except our house. I can see it engulfing the walls and relentlessly continuing inward. My blood runs cold every time I gaze at the perimeter of it. It's not like staring at a wall in your room with all the lights off. It's more absolute. It feels like the inverse of the matter that we normally interact with, as if the universe reversed course and began constricting. I was always convinced that darkness was simply the absence of light, but now I'm convinced that it is something more predatory. I'm holding on to Laura on our couch. She was crying, but I could no longer see or hear her. I'm forced to hold my phone a few inches from my face to see what I'm writing. Hopefully I can send this out before the darkness swallows me too. This is a true story. One time in the summer, my friend and I walked a mile or two to an empty crop field to do some stargazing. Well, we walked to a nice dark spot in the field. I looked behind me because I had a feeling someone was watching me, and I saw my friend a few feet behind me and thought nothing of it. But then I turned back around to keep walking, and he was walking along right next to me. I said, "What the hell just happened?" He had no idea what I was talking about, so that creeped me out a bit, but we continued on. We found a spot and sat down to do some stargazing about an hour in. We saw a massive flash come from the sky above us, and over the course of a few hours, 4 bright white lights danced around the sky, maneuvering in ways no plane could. This small UFO sighting, however, is not the main focus of this story. During the light show, my friend kept asking when we would leave. So after he asked us about 6 times, I asked him why he wanted to leave so badly, and he told me he was seeing red lights that were on the ground out of the corner of his eye. I dismissed this as just simple paranoia, as I hadn't seen any red lights on the ground, just the bright white ones in the sky. About an hour later, we left the field. I'll admit I was starting to feel like I was being watched again, but once again, I dismissed it as just my overactive imagination. The thing that made me feel a little weird was how my friend would keep saying, "We need to walk faster," while sounding like he was genuinely panicked. I would ask him why he was in such a hurry, and he wouldn't tell me, and said that we just needed to leave. This behavior continued for the rest of the walk back to his house. When we arrived back, he told me how the red lights he'd seen would always come in pairs, and how at some point he realized they were eyes. He told me how he knew they belonged to something big, that all he could see was its silhouette, and at that point, his story lost most of its credibility to me. We went and sat down on the couch where he continued his explanation. We discussed this for about 7 minutes. I was completely skeptical the whole time, and trying to disprove what he thought he saw. But then any skepticism I had left was immediately put to rest because there was a loud scratching noise on the right side of his house, and lasted for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, followed by silence, and that feeling of being watched came back much stronger than before, as my friend and I sat there, silent and unmoving, occasionally whispering to each other about what the hell we just heard. Later that night, when we mustered up the courage to move again, we went around the house and locked everything that could be locked and tried to distract ourselves, which didn't work very well. But it was pretty quiet the rest of the night, which is pretty creepy because the scratching noise sounded like it came from something rather large. And that's my story about my encounter with something still unknown to me.